Do you believe that you are growing the best bonsais that you can? No, me neither. I don't think you are. You can do better. It is said that some people do bonsai for 40 years, but every year they do bonsai for the first year. Effectively, they never learn anything. They don't push themselves. They don't try to get better. Middle of winter is a time for reflection, and I'm going to ask you, what are you going to do differently next year compared to this year? What are you going to learn? What are your ambitions? Let's do a little bit of a reflective session on ambitions in bonsai. They're important, but what ambitions could you have? A few years ago, a bonsai friend of mine was visiting in my garden and he made the comment, your trees look the same as they did 5 years ago when I was here. And that hurt. But it made me realize he was not wrong. Effectively, I had not set any goals for my bonsai. I was just working on them, I was maintaining them, but I never looked at them and said, what do I want to achieve with this tree? And therefore they all just stayed the same. Since that unfortunate afternoon, or actually I should say fortunate afternoon, I've set myself a few goals for each of my trees for the next year and where it wants to go. This, for instance, is a group, it's created out of seedlings, and it was in a tiny little pot just 6 years ago. And I didn't know what to do with it, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to develop this as a Bjorn Björnholm group planting, and I want it to be very big. Every year it gets planted in a bigger pot. I do root work, and every fall I'm pruning back all these long runners, but most of the season, most of the branches get to run. Now, what does this mean for you? And don't worry, the aim of this video is not to get you to the point that you say, I want to become a graduated bonsai lecturer or I want to open up a bonsai school. No, it's much more fundamental. It's just looking at your own trees. Should this go or should this stay? This can go. And deciding where do you want your trees to go and where do you as an individual want to go in your bonsai journey. Because that is actually what it is. Every year you grow, your trees grow with you. But at the same time, as your trees grow and develop, you might need to develop some new skills. So what skills are on the plate for you next year? Now, if you are just a beginner, first year, second year into bonsai, I know a lot of my viewers are at that stage. And if you're at that stage and you've not subscribed, that might be one of the ambitions for the next year. But what else could you do? Look, these goals and aspirations can be very different from person to person, right? I have different ambitions than you. And that's completely fine. This tree might have different options than some other trees that you might have. And that's also completely fine. I am at this point just pruning back to create a bit of structure. But as a beginner, this is what you might be doing. You're just pruning back to keep the profile back into place. How about I challenge you for next year and say, well, look critically at your tree. And as you are pruning, decide not only do I need this branch, but if I do need it, I will have to wire it. And I'm not really confident in wiring. So for the next year, I'm going to train myself in wiring properly. I'm going to put the wire in an even distance along the branch at a consistent angle. I'm not going to squeeze the branch anywhere. I'm not going to cross any of the wires. And maybe you even say, I am going to go and take a class in wiring. So the next year, I'm going to perfect my wiring. That could be one of the ambitions. But maybe you say, you know, Jelle, you have no idea what you're talking about. As a beginner, I know exactly how to wire. But it's interesting what you're doing there now. You're pruning this tree and I don't really understand what you're pruning away. Which is fine, because I have no idea either. I'm at the moment just removing old, thick branches. But you might say, I want to have a much better understanding of what I'm pruning away and why and when. So for the next year, I'm going to focus on pruning. Either pruning for structure or pruning for development. Those are actually two different things, you know. So those are two ambitions that you could have as a beginner in bonsai. Now look at a more experienced, an intermediate level bonsai grower who is happily in his garden growing his trees for a couple of years. You have the basics down. You know how to repot. Actually, if you don't know how to repot, that might be another ambition for a beginner. Learn how to repot properly and do good root work. Good root work is the basis for good trees, and therefore learning how to do root pruning without killing the tree is a very, very important component. I think this tree is done, guys. Come on, you can do better. You can grow better bonsai. Now I can imagine that if you have been doing this for a couple of years, and every year you've indeed reflected upon where am I with my trees and what do I want to achieve next year. This, by the way, is a little cherry. It's a koyonomai and it's a spring flowering cherry. You can get them in any garden center. They're quite inexpensive, they're lots of fun to work with, but they don't really like to be wired. So the wire that I put on is going to be very light wiring. I'm just putting gentle curves in the tree and not much more than that. Anyway, so you have learned all these methods, right? You know how to take care of your tree, you're happy with the watering and the fertilizing. In fact, watering and fertilizing is something also as an intermediate grower after 3 or 4 years. There's probably space for improvement. So that is something that you could look at. Make sure that your trees are always in optimal health. Not just alive, but thriving, because that is of course very important for good bonsai. They need to be in optimal health, otherwise they don't respond well to all the techniques. Well then, if you have all that, then one of the things you could look at, maybe I want to learn more advanced techniques. If you're into propagation, you could say I want to learn how to do air layers. Seems to be quite difficult for some people to learn how to do air layers, so practice that on a few trees. That you say, I've grown a sacrifice and I'm going to take an air layer, cut that off and grow it out. That might be a nice ambition for next year. Is this an ambition for you? Drop me a comment down below, let me know. And then, yeah, you know it all. You've done everything, you've seen everything. You're a very, very experienced bonsai grower. Does that mean there's nothing left to learn? No. There is something else that I am going to challenge you for the next year. How about doing 2 things? First of all, use that expertise that you have, go to a club, give a workshop, share that wealth with another person. And in fact, if you've been doing bonsai for maybe 10 years, there should be a couple of trees in your collection that are also worth seeing. Am I right? Yeah? Well, why don't you exhibit them? And not just exhibit them, but try to make them the best trees that you can. So make sure every single branch is where it needs to be. Close over all these old cut marks. Wire out even the tiniest of branch the season beforehand. Look for moss. Understand how it's not just one type of moss on a pot. It's not just about just moss. It is also about the patterns that you create with it. Do all those things and show your experience and your expertise off. This cherry is almost ready for winter. Just one more wire on this side, but I also need to check what I'm doing. And talking and wiring and positioning all together is not always a great idea. As said, this tree doesn't really like wire, so I have to be very gentle with it. Also because the flowering buds for next year are already there. And as said, this is a very gentle wire. So also as a more advanced or even experienced person, there's things that you can learn when it comes to wiring. Light wiring, heavy wiring, tight bends, wide bends. Keep pushing yourself. Because only by pushing yourself you're going to get the best trees and the best you. And I realize bonsai is for most people just a hobby. In fact, it's just a hobby for me. I'm just taking it very seriously. And you could as well. Yeah, one more branch, this one, and then I'm all done. Eye for detail is not my strongest suit, so I usually am a little bit sloppy. So for me, next year, I have a few things on my self-improvement intentions and growth for next year. I want to finally get a tree from one of my grow beds, because I'm always in my grow beds, but I never plant them up. Might actually be a Fuji cherry, like this one. I aim to participate in an exhibition. And besides that, I'm going to give the beginners workshop of my bonsai club. I already, of course, do individual workshops with people, or for clubs an individual evening, but a full-on beginners workshop, start to finish, for the club, 6 nights. That's new to me. Now, if you intend to follow my advice, I have another advice. Try to make your self-set goals SMART. And SMART, that is in the business sense. And SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Effectively, it means that if you say you're going to do something, you also say specifically what you want to do. So this is not just a tree that I want to create in the Björn Björnholm style. I already said I want it to be very big. I want to have heavy trunks. I want to have no big cut marks, so it's not going to be just grown out to very long ends. And I want to have this finished by 2030 in a very big size in a nice pot. Now, can this be done in the next 5 to 6 years? Probably yes. Could it have been done in less time? Maybe, but not with the skills that I had at the time. What this does, first of all, you can track your progress. You know exactly what you want to achieve. There's a way to measure whether you're achieving it. Now, actually making this in a good bonsai style is difficult to measure. I could have added to it, I want to exhibit this in 2030 somewhere. Then you have something that you can measure. Did I exhibit, yes or no? Then it needs to be reasonable. Can you grow this out? Yes, you can. Then it needs to be relevant. Is this something that I really want to learn and want to do? Yes. Do I actually learn things from it? Yes, I learn because I need to really understand how maples grow. Then, time-wise, is it time-bound? Yes, because I've said 2030 is when I want to have it done. If you do this, you can always track whether you're meeting your goals. And actually, it is a push for yourself to really try and do it. Because if you just leave it open-ended, oh, at some point this should be a nice bonsai, then it is just going to sit on your shelf. Nobody's going to tell you that your trees are not developing unless, of course, you have a friend like mine who comes out and just blatantly says, I don't think your trees are developing. I thought you weren't. I thought you wanted to be better at bonsai. And it really helps you to create better trees. And isn't that in the end what everybody wants? I personally believe that everybody who's growing bonsai can grow better bonsai, but they might need a little bit of a push. And isn't the end of the year a great time to reflect upon what you're doing and what you want to improve next year? I know that I do. I try to think every year and at every tree, what can I improve? Have you considered air layering? No? Grafting. Have you grafted a tree? Grafting a tree is also one of those more advanced techniques that is very, very useful if you want to perfect your tree. But it's not taught all that often. It takes a long time to do because the tree needs to actually fuse with the grafted branch, and therefore it is difficult to see whether you're successful or not. And I would really recommend grafting as one of the things to learn next year. Anyway, I think this was it. This was Jelle, growing bonsai, with just a few things on self-improvement